In 2010, a California FBI office received a letter from an inmate inside the Men's Central Jail in Los Angeles. The letter stated that there were deputy sheriffs inside the facility who were using excessive force and violently beating inmates. The FBI was extremely interested in investigating these claims. The only problem was that this was just one letter, written by an inmate who they had no way of knowing was telling the truth or not. For the FBI to prove these allegations, they would need more. So they reached out to a prisoner named Anthony Brown. Anthony Brown was born in New York on February 19, 1967. At a young age, he discovered his love for music, and by the time he was in his 20s, he was already working in the music industry around some of the biggest names in entertainment. After working in New York, he was offered a sound engineering job in California with a top music producer. But some years after moving to California, Anthony developed a dangerous drug habit, which eventually led to him losing his job and running out of money. Addicted to drugs, Anthony began robbing and stealing to get money to support his habit. In 2005, Anthony was charged and convicted of multiple robberies. He served 4 years in prison and was paroled in July of 2009. But within days of his release from prison, Anthony's drug addiction took over. Needing money fast, he went on a crime spree, robbing 3 businesses in 3 weeks. All 3 armed robberies were caught on camera. In August of 2009, 6 weeks after being paroled, Anthony Brown was caught on Skid Row carrying the weapon used to commit the robberies. He was arrested and later sentenced to 423 years. A year later, Anthony was at the Men's Central Jail in Los Angeles, waiting on a court date, when he was contacted by an FBI agent who wanted to meet with him. During their meeting, the agent told Anthony about a letter that the Federal Bureau of Investigations received detailing widespread corruption and the use of excessive force by deputies against inmates inside the Men's Central Jail. The agent explained that the FBI was in the process of investigating these claims, and that they were told by another inmate that Anthony might be able to help. Anthony had witnessed incidents of prisoners being beaten, and he personally knew of sheriffs who took cash bribes in exchange for favors. After a few more meetings with the agent, Anthony Brown signed on to become an official FBI informant. In 2011, Anthony told a deputy sheriff inside the jail that he'd give him $1,500 if he could smuggle in a cell phone. All the deputy had to do was meet with one of Anthony's people on the outside, get the phone, and then bring it to Anthony in his cell. The deputy agreed and accepted the money. But instead of meeting a friend of Anthony's, he met an undercover FBI agent. The sheriff's deputy took the phone from the agent and gave it to Anthony in his cell, not knowing that the phone was being given to Anthony from the agent so that Anthony could call and report jailhouse abuse directly to the FBI office. And that's what Anthony did. He kept in constant contact with his FBI handlers, talking to them at least once a week to provide evidence that would help with their investigation. He also took detailed, handwritten notes with the names of abusive sheriff's deputies who beat up inmates, and of deputies who were known to smuggle drugs into the Central Jail in exchange for bribes. As an FBI informant, Anthony Brown reported over 50 cases of corruption and abuse. But after less than a month of having the cell phone, it was discovered by a jailhouse deputy who found it wrapped in a latex glove and hidden inside a bag of Doritos. Sheriff's officials' first thought was that this was just a case of an inmate who had somehow gotten a cell phone so that he could contact the outside. But when they ran the number that Anthony called most often, It came back registered to the Los Angeles FBI headquarters. Anthony was immediately taken from his cell and brought to an interrogation room where he was interrogated for hours. During the interrogation, Anthony admitted to being an FBI informant, telling sheriff's deputies that he did it because terrible things were happening inside the jail. Those in charge of the Men's Central Jail at that time were LA County Sheriff Lee Baca and Assistant Sheriff Paul Tanaka. And as soon as Paul Tanaka's office was told about Anthony Brown working with the FBI, deputy sheriffs were instructed to make sure that Anthony had no further contact with the FBI office or his FBI handlers. So 10 sheriff's employees developed a plan to hide Anthony from the FBI. Sheriff's deputies changed Anthony's jail records to make it appear like Anthony had been released from jail, and then they rebooked him back into custody under a fake name. And every 48 hours, they did this same thing, moving Anthony to a different jail location, releasing him in the system, and then rebooking him under a new fake name, new inmate number, and new physical description. And they did this for 18 days. During that time, Anthony was held in solitary confinement so that sheriff's officials could question him and get information about what exactly he had told the FBI. While Anthony Brown was being hidden away, the FBI became concerned when they didn't hear from him. Agents called and went to the Men's Central Jail, but they were told that there was no Anthony Brown in custody. The FBI even obtained a court order from a federal judge to force the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department to turn over Anthony Brown to U.S. Marshals. But once the court order was served to the Sheriff's Department, it disappeared. While the FBI was wondering where Anthony was wondering where they were at. The FBI had told him that if his cover was ever blown, they'd be there immediately to come and get him. But when Anthony asked the sheriff's deputies about the FBI's whereabouts, they lied and told him that the FBI had abandoned him and left him for dead. When sheriff's officials were done questioning Anthony about what he told the FBI, they simply transferred him back to state prison and rebooked him under his real name, like nothing ever happened. But in 2012, the LA Times published a story exposing the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department's intent to hide Anthony Brown and prevent him from talking to the FBI. After the story came out, a spokesperson for the Sheriff's Department released an official statement insisting that Anthony Brown was not being hidden from the FBI. Their claim was that once it became known inside the jail that Anthony was an informant, sheriff's officials feared that he might be retaliated against or killed by corrupt deputies who saw him as a snitch. The Sheriff's Department's official statement was that Anthony Brown was being hidden to protect him. That was also the statement that came from Sheriff Lee Baca and Under Sheriff Paul Tanaka after charges were filed against them and 8 other sheriff's officials. But when the case went to trial, one of the sheriff's deputies who was involved testified on the stand that at no point were they protecting Anthony Brown for his own safety. The deputy testified that from the very beginning, they were told by their superiors that they were hiding Anthony from the FBI. In 2016, Assistant Sheriff Paul Tanaka was found guilty of helping lead a scheme to conceal an inmate who was working as a federal informant, and for deliberately hindering an FBI investigation. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Sheriff Lee Baca was sentenced to 3 years for interfering with the federal investigation and for lying to the FBI. The 8 sheriff's employees who worked together to hide Anthony were all sentenced to prison terms ranging from 1 to 4 years. And the deputy who smuggled in the cell phone was fired. 11 other sheriff deputies were also fired for abusing inmates and for falsifying reports to cover up that abuse. Because of Anthony's help as an FBI informant, everyone involved in the Men's Central Jail FBI investigation was either fired or sentenced to prison. And Anthony Brown, he filed a civil rights lawsuit against Los Angeles County and the Sheriff's Department for cruel and unusual punishment. And in 2022, a settlement was reached, and Anthony Brown was awarded $1 million. Today, Anthony is still in prison, serving out the remainder of his 423-year sentence.